Silence-based authority. You didn't fight back. You didn't defend yourself. And that's when everything froze. When the attack began, they didn't come quietly. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. The pressure increased. The resistance appeared. The doors you expected to open suddenly closed. People turned cold. Situations became heavier, and it felt like everything was moving against you at once. That's when you thought, why now? What did I do wrong? Why does it feel like I'm under attack? But here's what you couldn't see. The moment the attack started, something else activated. Not visible, not loud, but absolute. An unseen force stepped in. While they were planning moves against you, something was already freezing their hands. While they were speaking your name with intention, something stronger was measuring every word. They believed momentum was on their side. They were wrong. Because the attack didn't put you in danger, it exposed them to a battlefield they don't own. You weren't unprotected. You were covered by something they can't access, and that's why their moves stalled. That's why their timing broke. That's why nothing landed the way it was supposed to. You thought you were being targeted. In reality, you were being guarded, and the protection wasn't emotional. It was intelligent, calculated, precise, unshaken. Because whatever stands behind you doesn't panic. It waits. It lets the opposition reveal itself. And only then, it responds. They underestimated the battlefield. They thought they were dealing with you, your face, your position, your current situation. They didn't realize they had stepped into something much larger. Because the moment they decided to move against you, they entered a space that doesn't respond to ego. This battlefield doesn't belong to emotion. It belongs to intelligence. Higher intelligence. They assumed you were exposed, vulnerable, alone. But what they never calculated was the authority standing quietly behind you. You see, there are levels to conflict. At the lowest level, people fight with words. At the next level, they fight with control. But at the highest level, moves are allowed or denied. And from the moment this started, their moves stopped getting approved. Their plans felt right in theory, but execution failed. Messages didn't land. Opportunities slipped. Support disappeared at critical moments. They blamed bad timing. It wasn't timing. It was intervention. Because whatever stands with you doesn't react emotionally. It observes. It watches patterns, intentions, motives hidden behind politeness. And once it identifies that a line has been crossed, it doesn't rush. It waits for full exposure. That's why they felt confident at first. They thought nothing was happening. They didn't realize silence was permission for them to reveal everything. And while they were getting comfortable, the system was already adjusting against them. Not to protect your comfort, but to protect your purpose. Your purpose triggered the protection. This wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't about them. The reason protection activated wasn't fear. It was alignment. There's a difference. Fear protects what's fragile. Alignment protects what's assigned. You weren't spared because you were weak. You were guarded because your role isn't finished. Some lives carry momentum. Some carry noise. Yours carries direction. And direction attracts oversight. That's what they don't understand. When someone moves with purpose, interference doesn't come from panic. It comes from precision. Your unseen allies didn't rush to defend you. They waited, because protection at this level isn't about stopping attacks early. It's about letting opposition reveal itself fully. Every move they made was recorded. Every intention cataloged. Every misstep noted. Not for punishment, for positioning. Because once a plan against you is fully exposed, it collapses under its own weight. That's why they felt bold. That's why they overplayed their hand. They thought silence meant absence. It didn't. It meant allowance. Allowance for them to step further than they ever should have. You didn't have to respond. You didn't have to fight, because this wasn't your battle to manage. Your responsibility was simple. Stay aligned. Stay calm. Don't interfere with the process. And while you did that, something else was preparing consequences they couldn't see coming. Every move became self-destruction. They thought they were advancing. In reality, they were accelerating their own collapse. Because when someone attacks a life that's under higher authorization, every step forward becomes a step deeper into consequence. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting timing they didn't understand. Systems they couldn't see. Intelligence that doesn't argue. It executes. That's the mistake they made. They assumed this was personal. It wasn't. This was structural. Every lie they told tightened the trap. Every manipulation reduced their options. Every attempt to control the narrative exposed more of their hand. They thought momentum was on their side, but momentum without permission is just speed toward impact. You noticed something strange during this phase. Things stopped landing. Plans stalled. Messages got stuck. Support disappeared. Timing broke. They blamed luck. They blamed people. They never blamed the real cause. They had stepped into a situation that no longer allowed success for them. Because when higher protection activates, it doesn't block enemies immediately. It lets them move long enough to destroy their own future. You stayed still. And that stillness became the most dangerous position on the board. When the freeze became obvious at first, no one noticed, because protection doesn't announce itself. It alters outcomes quietly. But then patterns started breaking. The same people who once moved freely suddenly couldn't advance. Opportunities vanished mid-step. Allies hesitated. Momentum collapsed without explanation. They felt it before they understood it. A delay here, a block there. A door that should have opened didn't. And that's when fear crept in. Because this wasn't resistance. Resistance pushes back. This was something else. This was immobility. They were present, but ineffective. Active, but powerless. Watching things slip while standing still. They started asking questions. Why isn't this working? Why did everything stop? Why are they still standing? But there was no answer they could accept. Because the truth was unsettling. The battlefield had changed ownership. You weren't being defended. You were being prioritized. And when priority shifts, everything else waits. They tried adjusting tactics, switching roles, rewriting strategy. Nothing changed. Because once movement is frozen at the source, no adjustment downstream can fix it. That's when they realized this wasn't about stopping you. This was about protecting what you were becoming. Purpose triggers protection. Here's what most people never realize. Protection doesn't activate because you're weak. It activates because you're important. You weren't shielded when you were small. You weren't guarded when you were invisible. You weren't intervened for when the stakes were low. But the moment your life aligned with impact, everything changed. Because some paths are too critical to be interrupted. Some people carry consequences bigger than themselves. And when you stepped fully into that lane, without announcing it, without demanding validation, the system responded. Not emotionally, not dramatically, precisely. Your unseen allies didn't rush in, swinging. They waited. They let your opposition expose intent, reveal character, overplay their hand. Because interference too early hides the truth, and truth is required before correction. That's why they were allowed to move, just long enough to reveal what they were really after. Once that was clear, the freeze came. Not punishment, containment. Because when someone threatens a future that affects others beyond you, they don't get confrontation. They get neutralized. You didn't need to fight. Your role was alignment. Their role was exposure, and the response already scheduled. Self-destruction without contact. Here's the part that confuses people the most. You didn't attack back. You didn't defend yourself publicly. You didn't expose anyone, and yet, everything they planned started collapsing on its own. Because when someone moves against a protected path, they don't need resistance. They need time. amplifies intention. Every lie they told required another lie to support it. Every manipulation demanded more control. Every move they made pulled them deeper into visibility. They thought you were unaware, but awareness wasn't your job anymore. You weren't the enforcer. You were the signal. And signals trigger systems. So while they were busy watching you, they stopped watching themselves. They overreached. They rushed. They trusted the wrong people. Because people who believe they're untouchable always expose themselves. That's how collapse really happens, not through revenge. Through imbalance. Their energy scattered. Their alliances fractured. Their narratives contradicted themselves. And you stayed quiet. Not because you were afraid, but because silence keeps your hands clean while pressure does the work. This is why the consequences didn't look dramatic at first. They looked like missed opportunities, internal conflict, sudden resistance from unexpected places, doors quietly closing. No thunder. No announcement. Just inevitability. Because destruction triggered by arrogance never needs help. It accelerates on its own. And the most unsettling part for them, you were nowhere near the blast radius. You weren't involved. Which means they can't blame you. Only themselves. Protection was never about hiding you. Most people think protection means invisibility. They think being guarded means staying small, quiet, unseen. But that was never the plan. Your unseen allies didn't step in to keep you hidden forever. They stepped in to make sure nothing interfered with your timing. Because rising too early is just as dangerous as never rising at all. So while others thought you were being delayed, you were being positioned. You were being moved out of noisy rooms and into strategic silence, out of fragile alliances and into unshakable alignment. That's why doors closed without explanation. That's why certain people exited your life abruptly. That's why opportunities disappeared only to be replaced by something quieter but stronger. You weren't being blocked. You were being Protection wasn't about comfort. It was about accuracy. Every setback filtered weakness. Every pause sharpened discernment. Every moment of stillness recalibrated your direction. And here's what they never realized. The longer you stayed untouched, the more dangerous your emergence became. Because when someone rises without scars from unnecessary battles, they rise clear. Clear in intention. Clear in authority. Clear in presence. And when that kind of clarity enters a system, it disrupts everything. Not through force, through truth. That's why resistance started forming before you even announced yourself. They felt it. A shift. An inevitability. Something they couldn't sabotage because it didn't depend on them. And that's when protection transforms into permission. Permission for you to be seen. Permission for you to take space. Permission for your name to carry weight without explanation. You weren't safe to stay silent. You were preserved to be undeniable. From protected to positioned, there comes a moment when protection changes form. Not because danger disappears, but because you outgrow it. This is the shift no one warns you about, when your unseen allies stop shielding you and start placing you. Placing you where your presence alone creates pressure. Placing you where your silence rewrites power dynamics. Placing you where resistance exposes itself without you lifting a finger. At this stage, nothing attacks you directly anymore, because now, anything that moves against you moves against the order itself. That's why opposition becomes sloppy. Why enemies contradict themselves. Why systems glitch when you walk in. You're no longer being defended. You're being backed. And backing doesn't look like comfort. It looks like sudden authority without asking, influence, without explanation, recognition, without campaigning. People feel it before they understand it. They sense that interacting with you has consequences now. Not emotional consequences. Structural ones. You don't threaten. You don't warn. You don't announce power. You carry it. And the most unsettling part, you didn't take anything from anyone. You didn't compete. You didn't fight. You didn't steal position. You were installed. That's why jealousy feels heavier around you. Why projection increases. Why people try to minimize you louder than before. Because they're not reacting to who you are. They're reacting to what you represent. A reminder that alignment beats aggression, that timing beats force, that silence beats spectacle. You're no longer surviving attacks. You're triggering reality checks. And the truth they won't admit: they weren't fighting you. They were fighting the moment you were always meant to arrive. And now that you're here, nothing needs to be proven. Nothing needs to be defended. Nothing needs to be explained. Because the battlefield changed, and you're no longer standing on it. You're standing above it. The ascension is quiet, but permanent. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been misunderstood like this? Share your experience in the comments.